The reason why I got into the space over a decade ago was I looked at the security model that these systems were offering and realized that cryptography and math really allows us to give an asymmetric advantage to individuals and the ability for them to defend themselves against adversaries, even at the level of nation states.
With all the talk about price action lately and the inflows and outflows of Bitcoin ETFs, I wanted to turn to an interview I did with Jameson Lopp. He's the co founder and CTO of Casa, a Bitcoin self custody solution. Now, Jameson has been in this industry for over a decade. He's lived through the bulls and the bears, and he remains bullish on the Bitcoin ecosystem. When it comes to Bitcoin, what's he excited about? Let's take a listen. Jameson Lopp, welcome to First Mover.
Great to be here.
Awesome to have you. Now, for the uninitiated, let's just start at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your story and then tell us about Casa.
Well, I mean, I've been involved in the space for over a decade. I've been working full time on Bitcoin self custody solutions since early 2015. And Casa is basically the next iteration that I've been working on since 2018. Now, the real goal of Casa is to help people get into a robust self custody setup. And that's because the promise of being your own bank has always been possible in this space, but there's a lot of pitfalls, foot guns, and best practices that people don't know about unless they spend a lot of time getting into it. So we're mainly here to help make it easier for people and make it so that they can put themselves in a strong position that follows a lot of the best practices without having to spend hours, days, weeks, months, reading through many, many years of history and catastrophic failures that we've learned from.
Well, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Many leaders in this space have said people don't actually want to self custody. They don't want to take on all of that responsibility. I remember CZ tweeted that a while back. He is facing some different challenges of his own right now. But what do you think when you hear like that? You obviously don't agree because you're building a solution, but what do you think?
Well, no, I mean, I do agree in a sense. And to be clear, I did not choose the easiest path for business opportunities in this space. And in fact, I would say in some regards, we are working against the grain. Basically, we're working against human nature. So I agree in the sense that human nature, from what I've observed, is to prioritize convenience over almost everything else. And so it's very clear to me, and it's not surprising anymore when we see people say, well, I don't want to take responsibility for that. To be fair, this is how civilization has advanced to the point where we are today. That's through outsourcing. It's through allowing people to specialize in one very specific thing and get very good at it. And so we are used to outsourcing many different aspects of our lives. And to go out here and essentially be preaching people about the virtues of self-custody and the security and sovereignty and stuff around that, it can very easily fall upon deaf ears because it's not a model that people are used to. And so what are we doing to fight against that? Well, we have to fight against the convenience of letting a trusted third party hold all of your money for you. So that's why one of our primary goals at Casa is to make self-custody as convenient as possible. I have no delusions that we're going to be able to get everybody into self-custody, but I just want to push back against this convenience narrative.
Why choose the path of most resistance?
It's about empowering both the individual. This is the reason why I got into the space over a decade ago. Was I looked at the security model that these systems were offering and realized that cryptography and math really allows us to give an asymmetric advantage to individuals and the ability for them to defend themselves against adversaries, even at the level of nation states. So being able to wield those tools at the individual level, I think if you get a sufficient amount of adoption, that actually bubbles up to potentially be a societal level change. And ultimately, this is one of the premises of the cypherpunk movement, which is that we build software, we build tools, and we distribute them far and wide, and we advocate for their adoption under the idea that adoption of these tools will actually have major impacts all across different aspects of society. And I think that this comes down to what I was just talking about. It's related to the fact that civilization has advanced to this point by allowing people to specialize. That's great from an efficiency standpoint, but if you look at the hierarchy, the architecture of what we have built as a civilization, while it's highly efficient in many different aspects, it's also highly fragile. So you could say that me advocating and building these type of things, uh, it's really a goal of it is to make many different aspects of our civilization stronger, more robust, basically against having a small number of people and entities that can have wield an outsized influence and power over us in various aspects of our lives.
Well, that is really the ethos of the industry, right? Is breaking down those centralized entities, those centralized powers, and decentralizing things, not only currencies. But I want to talk about that mainstream adoption narrative. This year has really been dominated by the approval of the spot Bitcoin ETF. And just given how long you've been building in this industry and the ethos at Casa, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the approval of the Bitcoin ETF and if you think it's pushing us in the direction that you envisioned all those years ago when you got into the industry, and other cypherpunks, maybe even Satoshi when he wrote the white paper.
Well, I've been waiting for a Bitcoin ETF for 10 years. Like, I remember in 2014 when I thought I was being smart by buying Bitcoin before the Winklevoss ETF was going to launch, and then
Hmm.
mainstream adoption was going to come in. And I guess I was right in a sense, but my timing was way off on that
Only 10 years
particular
off, but
instance. Yeah.
not really your fault.
No, no. And so, if anything, I had just stopped even paying attention to all the ETF stuff because I figured it was never going to pass. And of course, it was only the result of some court and judicial action that I think that it really went through. So, where are we now? Well, Casa is viewing this as a kind of competitor, right? Because while it's going to be good from a financial standpoint that a lot more value flows into the space, that ought to trickle down in a variety of different ways and make different aspects of the ecosystem more secure simply because more resources are going to be available. The flip side of that is worrying about systemic risk, the centralization, particularly even within the array of ETFs that have already launched. The fact that like 80 to 90% of all of the Bitcoin are actually being held at one custodian. That is like a level of centralization that really irks me. And so, of course, we'll keep paying attention to seeing just how much money is flowing into these ETFs. Can we at least get some of the ETF providers to diversify their custody more over time? I suspect that it will, but I couldn't really speculate as to how much it's going to diversify. And I think the ideal scenario would be that we get a lot of these ETFs to actually do self custody. Fidelity, I think, is standing alone right now, being the only provider that's doing self custody. There is, of course, a lot of like regulatory hurdles and stuff you have to jump through to do that, but I think it's better for the space in general. So my main issue is if we kind of if we get ahead of our skis in a sense, if Bitcoin actually becomes too popular and has too much mainstream adoption and it's happening all through those ETFs, that could be problematic. And then you do have to start worrying about potential attacks on the custodians from a variety of different vectors.
Okay, so you're saying, and just tell me if I'm not understanding correctly, is if it becomes too popular and if there aren't more custodians, we don't start to decentralize the custodians or the asset managers, the issuers start self custodying their Bitcoin, we think we're creating a pretty big target and lots of people could potentially lose money.
Yeah, because I mean, Bitcoin is essentially a bug bounty, and that's true in a variety of different senses. Both at the protocol level, but also at like every application and every corporate custodian level. When you have billions of dollars of Bitcoin, that puts a huge target on your back, and people will start to allocate more and more resources to attacking you. So we want to prevent another Mount Gox, another FTX. If that happened at the level of Coinbase, it would be very bad. It wouldn't kill Bitcoin. Of course, the network doesn't care. It would continue on, but the sort of ripple effects across the ecosystem would have a massive setback.
What are the chances of that happening, do you think?
Well, it's hard to say. I'm not out here like trying to FUD Coinbase or say that they
Mhm.
have issues. They have a great record, and I'm sure they have a great security team. But they are a black box, so it's not possible for me to say that like I can sign off on all of their processes or that I approve of what they're doing because I don't know what they're doing. This is actually something where it would be nice if we could get them to go through like a cryptocurrency certification consortium audit to see if they're following the security standards that we've been developing at that association for a while. It's like one thing where I'm on the advisory board there, and we we want a lot more of these custodians and really anyone, especially who's handling other people's money, to go through these type of audits, just so that we can make sure we're all on the same page. And really, what it's coming down to is best practices.
Just mentioned you're on the board there. Have you asked Coinbase to go through an audit?
I have not directly asked them. No, I mean, I'm sure that they're aware of us, but this consortium was founded back in 2015, I think, by a number of different companies. I know BitGo was one of the founders because I was there at the time. I'm not aware of what relationship, if any, Coinbase has. But there's some kind of chicken and egg problems when you've developed a standard, and so we've had this standard that we developed back in 2015, and now it's basically at the point of how do we get the ball rolling on this, and how do we make it a sort of badge of honor that people want to be able to say that they are following this particular set of best practices. In the security industry, there are many different standards and many different best practices, and this is really meant to be complementary to all of those others, and with a lot of like crypto and private key specific best practices.
Well, I got to ask you, Coinbase is a public company. They are regulated to an extent. I think many people watching this who don't know the ins and outs might say, well, we have to trust that they're doing the best to secure the funds that are on their platform because they have to, issue reports and because they are regulated and they issue reports to the regulator. What would you say to those people?
FTX was one of the most highly regulated companies in the crypto ecosystem. I don't have a great opinion of like regulators and regulations in general. It doesn't really mean very much to me because they tend to be trying to solve for other types of problems. So while I'm sure there's a lot of good internal accounting, and I'm sure they're following like SOC 2 standards and best practices and stuff. There's always more that you can do, and when it comes to sort of attestations and proving to everyone that you're following the best standards, that's great. But even I guess my point, even beyond all of this, it doesn't really matter like what level of security you have. You can have the best security in the world. Having everybody's money in one place is just never a good idea. And so that's the sort of systemic risk that worries me about the funds that are flowing into ETFs.
Jameson, I've never asked anyone this on this show, and I can't believe I haven't. But do you ever think to yourself, what happens if it all fails? What happens if something catastrophic happens, it all goes to zero, the experiment fails, and this thing that you and I talk about every day no longer exists. Does that thought ever cross your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it did a lot more in the early days, and my take on it is really, what type of failure are we talking about? Because the the short version, the short explanation that I can come up with, that I've said several times, is that the only way for this system to truly fail, like permanently fail, is if all of us who care about it, who have been contributing to it with our skills, me, technical skills, you with your journalism and reporting skills, everybody has different skills that they're contributing. We have to all decide that it's just not worth contributing anymore. We have to become apathetic and dejected and basically say we're giving up on this. So, what does it really mean for Bitcoin to fail and go to zero? There are any number of technical failures that could happen, and pretty much all of them are going to have a technical solution. It's been a long time, but we have had catastrophes in the space before where the network has failed temporarily, and we fix it and we move on. We could have government level crackdowns, but once again, I don't foresee a coordinated, one world government type of crackdown. We've already seen Bitcoin weather amazing crackdowns in China, and while that had some massive effects for like 6 months or so, once again, network recovered, people moved on. So my general takeaway on all of this is that there are so many of us and we are so dispersed that it's just not feasible for there to be a permanent failure. I have yet to come up with, in my wildest imaginations, a type of failure that would cause us to all stop working on Bitcoin that wasn't a result of some other massive, bigger problem, uh, under which Bitcoin would be the least of our worries. Talk about like a World War III or nuclear, fallout, some sort of like apocalyptic scenario where I think Bitcoin would not even be at the top of people's minds. That's why they would stop working on it, is because they were worried about more pressing matters. So, as long as humanity doesn't destroy itself, I'm reasonably assured that we'll have enough people continuing to be interested in and devoting their resources to working on this project.
Jameson, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.